thank you, all of you, for coming this evening. It's always a great pleasure to be invited to undertake these events because it gives an opportunity to reflect a little bit on one's own practice. And of course, gender parity is absolutely the core of what I believe in, but I'm so busy doing it that I often don't stop to think about why I'm doing it. And of course, I'm going to begin with this slide of Zoffany's depiction of the Royal Academy in London. And I just wanted to start with the reason why the collection that I supervise, which covers European and American art, or initially European and American art from 1900 to the present day, was principally a collection of art made by white men. And you can see because, of course, women women were excluded from the schools of the Royal Academy until right at the end of the 19th century. So that is the beginning of the history we tell at Tate. But of course, this is the community that we tell it to. And we live in a city that is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, with 48% of BAME inhabitants. And this is the modern academy, young people, male, but principally female, in the galleries, seeing exhibitions, studying art, and they want a piece of the history. In relation to the history that the collection is built around, we follow the route map established by Alfred Barr and told in most sort of fullest way at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's a story of the evolution of modernism in Europe and North America, according to a particular series of avant-garde innovations, from Cubism through to geometrical abstract art, and with a side story into surrealism. And this is the story that underpinned the collection when I came to the Tate in the 1980s, and that was absolutely exemplified in the first and somewhat radical rehang of the collection that took place in 1992. And this is the map of the old Tate, written in by the hand of Sir Nicholas Sirota, showing his conception, his new conception, for the display of the modern collection at Tate. And as you cast your eyes over that map, you will see that amongst the many artists and movements, I think there are about 3 females. So I think you can see Rebecca Horn, I think you can see somewhere Barbara Hepworth, and maybe Gwen John is lurking as well. But when I joined the Tate at about this time, I was very aware that this was an insufficient history. It wasn't a history that addressed my personal experience, and it wasn't a history that addressed my gender. That was a moment when the new art history was being written, addressing new perspectives, both geographical and in relation to gender, and there was a whole shift in the humanities at the time that we were very aware of. But the pivotal experiences that I had in thinking about art history came from artists. And I think keying in the place and activism of contemporary artists has been absolutely instrumental in really shifting the nature of practice in museums like Tate. Just wanted to show this juxtaposition of this year's Turner Prize winning artist Lubaina Himid with a Pablo Picasso, a painting by Lubaina that she made in the 1980s, and Pablo Picasso's two women running on the beach from 1922. Lubaina is of African descent, and it's a beautiful, I think, appropriation of Picasso's image of 2 women running, but it's also a reappropriation of Picasso's appropriation of African tribal art. And it's a wonderful example of how women have been taking back the history from which they have been excluded. Another example from my early years as a curator, an artist I got to know very well, Helen Chadwick, and I love this gendering or regendering of the minimalist cube. So, the strategies that we have undertaken at Tate Modern, a collection principally of European and North American art made by men, there have been a number of such strategies. The principal strategy that we undertook when we opened Tate Modern in 2000 was to dispense with the framework of Western art history, chronological, divided into isms, with focuses in Paris, New York, Berlin, and so forth. And instead, we reorganized the collection in broad thematic displays, allowing us to connect very immediately contemporary practice with different moments in the past. And that had a very, very interesting impact, because suddenly, within the framework of themes, anything was possible. We were no longer confined to a history bound by a kind of hierarchy of painting and sculpture. We were no longer bound by a history and confined to geography. So within that thematic approach, we began to play with the collection in ways that would both reveal its gender biases, and I think it's incredibly important that we are honest about the frameworks with which we look at history. So, for example, we had interesting displays around the female nude, which we juxtaposed with a very radical work by Sam Taylor Wood of a male nude. And what was interesting was that this room was absolutely adored by our public, and this work was absolutely horrific in terms of the public response. It was such a shocking image, but it was re-inscribing the female nude with the notion that here are, women portrayed without their clothes by men wearing their clothes. We also thought about the historical time frame. History has been written from a particular perspective, and a particular place. And we wanted to stretch some of those categories to provide a more elastic and perhaps a more honest reflection of art history. So here is a display we made in 2006 around minimalism, drawing on some of the major works in the collection, but thinking and building the collection from that basis as we began to explore a wider geographical remit. We were able, in 2016, to play out minimalism across the world and involving a number of really key women artists, because, of course, this is a moment where artists across the world were reinventing a kind of formalism in relation to architecture and the body. So on the right-hand side, Charlotte Poznanska, extraordinary German artist. In the front here, Ronnie Horn. At the back, a work by Salawat Rouedé from the Lebanon. So you begin to see that minimalism isn't just the property of a privileged group of American artists, absolutely inscribed in the marketplace, but was very much a sort of generational shift across the world. And its legacy continues to resonate in many parts and many different centres of production. We also looked at pop, and here in 2008 was sort of classic pop hang, American pop, as you might see at Leo Castelli Gallery and at many American museums. But of course, there is a myth that pop art is exclusively American. So almost 10 years later, having built the collection and thought about art in Latin America and Eastern Europe, we were able to look at this sort of interest in commercial imagery and the kind of popular life across a very, very broad territory, putting back into the displays a number of really major female artists who've simply been forgotten from history because it has been prescribed in such a narrow way. So on the right-hand side there, this fantastic curtain piece by Beatrice Gonzalez. So rethinking history with broader perspectives, more international, more open, more questioning has enabled us at Tate to put back into history some really important works by and practices by overlooked female artists. And maybe we can talk about the marketplace since then. So I talked about the framework, the rules, the isms have been a kind of stranglehold, but so has the privileging of painting and sculpture. And when we think about the history of art and the way so many women were excluded from the academy, were excluded from even gaining the tools in which to compete with male painters and sculptors, it's not surprising that many women took their creativity into other areas. And we all know now it's almost a convention that women have excelled in areas of craft. And I think what we're trying to do at the Tate is actually draw attention to the really major achievements that women have made outside their conventional areas. So somebody like Magdalena Abakanowicz, who had an astonishing career in Poland in the 1960s and 70s, was incredibly well known as a sort of high priestess of fiber art. Astonishing work, but collected by many museums, not as part of their fine art collections, but as in the case of MoMA, for example, in their design departments. And that work needs to come back centre stage. And once you begin looking at craft techniques, you see a whole other history happening, which again is global and is very, very much about the extraordinary achievements of women. So Mrlina Mukherjee, a Delhi-based artist, absolutely, totally enthralled to Magdalena Abakanowicz. And another American artist, Lenore Tawney, coming full circle to this country. And Lenore Tawney was the craftswoman who reinvented weaving and who had then a very major impact on the painting of Agnes Martin. So these aren't media that lie outside the realm of art. They're deeply embedded in the discourse. Women, of course, have occupied the margins for so long, but what fantastic margins. And you see during the 1960s, when women were still struggling to be represented by commercial galleries, finding their place, doing really experimental work in sculpture, in community practice. This is an artist called Anna Lupash, one of a number of really major Eastern European artists who deserve to be much better known, whose work is on a par with Joseph Beuys. Suzanne Lacey, feminist, American, participatory, performance artist, well known here, but we've brought her to London. She's reactivated a generation of senior women in the galleries. So all these strategies are bringing women sharply to the forefront of our work in London. I'm a great believer that we don't just pepper our displays with the work of women, but we need to make major exhibitions around key figures in the 20th century. So Agnes Martin, Yayoi Kusama, Mona Hatoum, artists from across the world on a par with the great retrospectives of Picasso and others that take place at Tate Modern. Finally, and I think this is a really important point, is that we can celebrate the creativity of women in our exhibitions programs, but what really will change history is building a collection, and building a collection by focusing on contemporary art and then looking at history in its wake. And amongst the wonderful works by contemporary women we've brought in recently, Jane Alexander's African Adventure and Sheila Gowder's Behold from 2009. For us, I think gender is inseparably bound up in diversity. As I said earlier, we have a hugely diverse community in London, and we're trying to reflect that diversity in the diversity of practice and the diversity of the stories we tell. And I'm just going to end with this juxtaposition of Kandinsky's Cossacks on the left-hand side of the screen and Tanya Bruguera's Tatlin's Whisper on the right-hand side of the screen. On the right-hand side, a work by a woman. She's Cuban. She works with live art and performance. Her work absolutely wrestles with the real world. At the heart of the work is the equestrian motif, and is absolutely bound up with the history of art, of Kandinsky's work, rushing from real life into abstraction, with the Cossack, the equestrian motif, absolutely at the centre too. And it's finding a way to present women in dialogue with the past, so there's a sense of ownership and collaboration. And that's what, for me, is gender parity in our museums. Thank you.